Hello and welcome to MalMakes. For the entire month of February, I've been doing pour paintings. Last time we did an underpainting of rainbow colors, poured a single color on top, and then scraped away to reveal the background. This time, we're going to be doing a multicolor pour where we use multiple colors and pour them onto the surface. Now, this one reminded me most of the Earthbound battle backgrounds, but this one reminds me of Splatoon, so that's going to be our subject matter this week. Given the ink-like nature of this, I thought it would be really cool to do a pour in one team's color and then to paint a squid in the opposing team color. So I've drawn in a squid and I've kind of based it a little bit more on a real-life squid because I love the long tentacles. So this is the squid I'm going to do on top after I do the pour. Now you can use any colors you'd like for this. You could paint something on top that's entirely different, or you could just leave the pour. It's really customizable and you can do whatever you'd like with it. But there are a few things I've learned that I'd like to share. First is you should be using white when you do this. It helps make your colors pop, and it kind of gives your eyes something to look at and show all of the different little intricacies that happen when you do a pour painting. And second, when you start, you should be using analogous colors. Those are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So if we look at the rainbow here on this one color pour, it's colors that are really close, like red and orange, or yellow and green. This one I used blue as my primary, and green is next to it, so I used green as well. I've done a few where I didn't use analogous colors. This is a complementary color scheme where we have red and green, which are across from each other. And what happens when you use complementary colors is it starts to make them more muted. It desaturates them. They lose intensity, so I don't have any of those really bright reds or really bright greens. This one also has white in it, so a combination of all three of those colors kind of made it a little bit gray in spots. And while this has some really cool things going on and it's really neat to look at, it's not as bright and eye-catching as I want this painting to be. Because Splatoon is such a bright, cartoony game, I don't want to have all of these muted colors. And that's why for the pour I'm only doing some oranges and I'm not going to be doing orange and blue together. It's because it's going to make it muted like this one is. Now, doing a painting like this does require some specialized setup and some specialized materials. So for your setup, you'll need somewhere where you can lay it flat, leave it alone where it will be protected from other people or animals or dust falling into it, and where you can protect everything else around it from itself, because you're going to have paint dripping off and getting everywhere. So I'll show you my setup once I get there. But you're also going to need something to paint on, and I'm using an 18 by 24 canvas, but these little 8 by 10s are great because they store really well, they're a nice size, they're a pretty standard size for picture frames, and then you have a bunch of them you can create really quickly. So I did like doing my tests on these 8 by 10s. They're a really great size. You're also going to need something to mix with, and I have a palette knife. You're going to need something to mix the pour in, and I'm just using some solo cups, but Dixie cups would work really well too if you're doing something a bit smaller. But the bigger you go, you will need more stuff, so the solo cups work really well for that. You're going to need some paintbrushes, and I use those a little bit during the pour just to get the sides, but mainly for painting the squid on top when I'm done. You'll need the pouring media, and I'm using GAC 800 for that because it helps the paint from cracking when it's dry. It makes it flexible so that I can kind of push on it and it moves when I push on it. You're also going to need your colors, and based on what you're doing you may be using different colors, but in order to do the orange that I want to do for Splatoon, I'm using Hansa Yellow Medium, and I'm using Naphthol Red Light. And these are both in High Flow Golden Artist Acrylic, and they are acrylic paints even though they're liquid. They're kind of like ink. And I also have some titanium white because, like I said, white does help make the colors pop. And I will be doing the squid on top later, and I'm going to be using the heavy body paint for that. And the majority of it is going to be cyan, but I'm also going to be using titanium white, Mars Black, primary yellow, and primary magenta. My setup for this is the same as it is for a one color pour. I have my cardboard box with my plastic sheeting. I have my canvas raised up from the bottom with these little risers I made out of solo cups. And I have some extra solo cups to mix each color in. And those risers, like again, they're just this top part of the solo cup. I have some paint brushes so that I can kind of paint the sides with the extra paint that runs down and clean it up. I have something to mix each of my colors, and this is just a flat palette knife. I have some paper towels, and I have some gloves, and then I have the stuff for the pour itself. I have GAC 800, and then for my colors, no matter what you're doing, you should use white because it helps make things pop. I find it really helps the entire thing out. And then because I'm doing orange, I don't have an orange high flow, but I have Naphthol red light and I have Hansa yellow medium that'll make a nice orange for me. So to do this, I'm going to take 5 cups and I'm going to lay out 4 of them ready to go. And the 5th one I'm just going to set aside for now because I'll need that in a minute. I have the GAC 800 and I'm just going to kind of move it around a little bit. I don't know if this one needs to be shaken, but definitely the high flow paints do to mix the pigment. So in case any of this did settle, I'm just going to shake it up a little bit, make sure it's closed. And then I'm going to put quite a bit in each cup. Because this is such a big canvas, I need to cover the entire thing in one go. There's no re-pouring after I'm done. And then in order to get a bunch of different oranges, one of them is going to be titanium white, one is going to be kind of a red orange, one is going to kind of be a medium orange, and one is going to be a yellow orange. So I'm going to put different combinations of that Hansa yellow and that Naphthol red in each one of these cups. It's about 10 parts GAC 800 to 1 part high flow, so I've shaken this up and I'm just going to put a little bit here in the cup. And then I'm going to move on to my next color. And for the red and the yellow, what I'm going to do is kind of start by doing like 5 drops of the red with 1 drop of yellow, and then kind of like 3 and 3, and then like 4 and 1, and then kind of see how I feel about those colors. If the ratio isn't right, or if it doesn't feel bright enough, I'm just going to add more of the corresponding color to the cup. So the ratio of these 3 colors worked out pretty well on the first try. So you can see that the one closest to me is a lot redder and the one furthest from me is a lot lighter because it has more yellow in it. And the one in the middle is pretty much a straight orange, so that worked out pretty good. The only thing is I think I might make them a little brighter, so put a little bit more paint into the GAC 800 because I noticed on the palette knife when I was mixing it, it looked a little transparent. So I'm just going to add a touch more paint to each of these. There's a few ways to take the paint from the cups and put it on the canvas. I can put every color in this cup, put the canvas upside down, flip it back, and then pick up the cup. But I find that with a canvas this big, kind of moving it in space without making a huge mess is kind of difficult. If you're working a lot smaller, like an 8x10, it works pretty good. And that's the size of my test one, so it worked out really great for that. I can put everything in the cup and then just kind of pour all of the colors at once onto the canvas, or I can take each individual cup and pour it onto the canvas, and that's how I'm going to do it today. So I'm going to start with maybe this yellow, the yellow-orange color, and start to pour it on the canvas. And I need to work quick because it's already starting to dry, and I'm going to kind of bring it in some of the different areas, making sure I use up all the paint so I don't waste any. Maybe I'll just set that there for now. I'll go into another color. Maybe bring that one all the way that way. And set that cup over there for now to drain out. And then I'll take the dark orange. Maybe bring that through there. And then I'm going to take the white and kind of pour it in between everything else. And then I'm going to pick up the canvas, and this is why I have gloves on, and just start to move it all around. And then once it's covered, I'm just going to set it back down on these cups. And I'm going to take off these gloves because I'm not going to be touching anything else. And I'm going to switch to my paintbrushes to clean up the sides. The other thing I'm going to do after I clean up these sides is I'm going to try and pop some of the bubbles. or they'll leave voids in the paint after it dries, and I want to do that before it starts to make a film on top. This is how it ended up drying, and comparing it to the single pour painting, it dried a lot slower. The single pour dried in about 48 hours. It kind of helped because once I poured the black on, I painted it super thin, so it was just a real thin coat across the canvas. And then I scraped away even more by doing those lines. So the 48 hours was pretty standard for how long that took. This took at least like 4 days. After I poured it on, I checked it in 24 hours and it looked like I had just poured it. It was still super wet. The edges were dry, but like this whole center part was just completely wet. So I left it alone, I had recovered it up, and I left it for another 2 days and I tested it again, and it was just a little tacky, but now it's all dry and I can touch it and it's not sticking to my fingertips. Now it did turn out a little more red than I wanted, but it did kind of turn out really beautiful. There's some really cool things happening in the pour that you just kind of have to let it be and let it do its thing because it's really unpredictable, but it does turn out really beautiful. So the next thing I'm going to do is reference that drawing I had done of the squid and use a chalk pastel and start to mark in where I want that to go. Once I'm happy with the drawing, I'm going to fill it in white, and I'm going to start by using that same liquid titanium white I used in the pour, but inside of this paint marker. And just because it helps to draw it in first instead of using a paintbrush, but this tends to be a little bit more transparent than the heavy body stuff. So once I do this liquid white, I'm going to switch over to the heavy body white and do a second coat with that. A few coats of white paint later, and it's really opaque here on top of the pour. What I want to do next is start to do a base color on top of the squid, and I'm going to be using primary cyan for that, and I'm just going to go over the entire thing with the cyan. Sometimes I find that doing a color on top of white leaves a lot of the white showing through it, and after I put some of the cyan down, where it's really thick, it worked really well, but where it gets a bit thinner, you can really see that titanium white underneath. So I've mixed some titanium white into my cyan, and that's going to be my new base layer. When I'm all done with this painting, you really won't see much of this, maybe only in the highlight areas of the squid, but it's going to be a good base layer because it's a bit more opaque than just pure cyan. I've been drawing the details on the squid, and I want to make sure I have everything right because once I start painting, I need to know where things are going to go. And it's easier for me, personally, if I draw them in so I can start to see it. Things like which one of these arms are going to be in front, and I've kind of decided this little one right here is going to be in front. So I've kind of drawn in where each of those go up towards the eyes. That way, when I start to paint this piece down here for this long one that comes to the corner, I know that this part needs to be darker than where this one starts. Otherwise, it'll just kind of blend in and you won't see that transition between both of them. For the arms, I've kind of flipped them. One is kind of the bottom and one is kind of the top, just to make it different and interesting. That way I can show off the big sucker that gets on the bottom and the spots that are on the top. The other thing I want to draw in is where the shadows are going to start to be. So like I've drawn this line here, because my light source I'm going to have up here, it's going to kind of hit the top part of the squid here, and then this bottom part is going to be in shadow. That's going to make it look 3D and make it a bit more realistic instead of this flat blue. So I'm also going to kind of sketch in here like what is going to be in shadow so that when I start painting I have an idea. For my colors, my midtone is going to be pure cyan, but for my shadow, I'm taking cyan with Mars Black. So on my palette, I have pure cyan here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a darker blue by using the Mars Black and putting it into this cyan here. And I'm going to use this as my shadow for everything, and I'm going to blend up into pure cyan on the canvas while it's still wet. That's why I have some cyan by itself here on my palette. And I'm just going to worry about that for now. I'm not going to worry about trying to blend my light blue color into this yet. I'm just going to worry about kind of these two and going back and forth. And I'm going to leave a little bit of Mars Black by itself on the canvas for some of the darkest areas where I really need it to be darker than this dark blue I'm making. So I'm starting with that dark blue I made, and I'm just laying it in these areas where I've put the chalk down so I know where it needs to be darker. And then I'm going to fade it into the cyan and just kind of paint that as far as I want it to go. And then wherever I want it to be really dark, like maybe right along this edge, I'm just going to grab a little bit more Mars Black and blend it into that area. I started the value by putting the dark color down, and then I tried to fade it into the regular cyan and then into the light color, but it was just too big of a jump between the two, so I realized I had to put cyan down first, and I did that kind of where I wanted the cyan plus where I want to have the shadow. And then after that's down, I can take the shadow and then start to bring that in dark along these edges. Also, these faraway places, the ones that are behind everything else, really get a lot of shadow, so I took the Mars Black and really just put that in there where it needed to be to make it darker. I wanted to get those all the way done because then I can worry about the ones on top and give them a nice clean line on top of these ones that are further away. So I finished those all up and kind of just feathered them out this way, and I can kind of finish this part of it later. But these are done so that I can bring the shadow here on top and make a nice clean line. All of the shading is done, so it's time to do the highlights, and I'm just going to take this light blue I have with the cyan and titanium white and blend it into the cyan so I have a nice transition here, just like I do over here. I filled in these two parts white to block it in, and then I started to draw in the eyes with the chalk pastel pencil. Now what I'm going to do next is block in the majority of it using black around the eyes and for the pupils. I'll be using a dark gray for the irises and white for the eyeballs themselves. I will be adding value later, but I want to block it in so it can start to cover up the blue, and then I'm going to work on these, and then I'll come back later when it's dry. I'm going to move on to the arms next and do these parts here. So what I'm going to do with that shading is I'm going to mix up a gray between white and black, and then I'm also going to use white and black to do more shading. And I'm going to continue shading it like I did the top part here where it's blue. So this will be a dark gray and then get darker as it goes towards the edge. And then the part you can see right here that's a little bit blue, or this part right here that's kind of like the sucker that they have. So I'm going to do it in a bump where it's going to raise up, and I'm going to shade it accordingly. So the right side of that is going to be light here, and then it's going to get dark as it comes around to the other side. Now these dots are basically just a lighter cyan, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take plain cyan, which is kind of right here on the colors, and I'm going to use it down here where it's darkest. And then I'm going to take this lightest color and use it in here where it kind of gets into the mid cyan, and then I'm going to mix up a lighter version with more titanium white and use it here where it's the brightest. The last bit of detail I have to do is the eyes, and I've taken a chalk pastel and drawn in lines, kind of like spokes on a bicycle, to help me line up where all of these are going to go here on the pupil. And I'm doing the pupil first because it's easier to clean up the outside and then the inside, just because I haven't touched those yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm using all different sorts of grays, which is everything from titanium white and a value scale to Mars black. So I'm just taking different grays, and I'm going to start by drawing lines lined up with those bicycle spokes. Just to start to give this some detail. Once I finished the eyes, I took a look at the hands and I realized that it was way too dark. Now I've already repainted this one so I could compare them both here on camera for you. My original thought had been, the highlights up here, so it's going to catch right here and then at the tip of the sucker here, and then it's going to get really dark. That's why I made them so dark. But after I finished the eyes, I thought they were way too dark, so I repainted this one to see if I liked it lighter, and it looks a lot better. So I'm just going to repaint this one so it's light too. And we're done! We have a squid from Splatoon. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a phone case or a poster, or fit on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. And if you painted alongside me today, I'd love to see it. Please tweet me with the hashtag MalMakes. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.